Aloha, everybody. This is Dr. Summer Nicole of SOMA, Women's Collective for Mind Body Healing. And today I have one of my dearest sisters, Libby Karstensen, talking about the heart chakra and grief recovery. And we were just talking about how timely this topic is. I feel like everywhere I look right now, like people are trying to recover from grief and really deeply grieving and a lot of intensity and kind of not knowing what to do with themselves. And so I just feel like this is so timely. Thank you so much for being here, Libby.
Thank you. It's truly a pleasure to be here. And it's something that I am really passionate about, which is grief and grieving because of all of the gifts that it's given me. So I'm hoping that today, in our time together, that we can expand the perspective around grief and how it really can be an opening to not just feeling better, but getting better at feeling, because it sure as heck has been for me.
Mm, beautiful. Yeah, and I've kind of watched you. So for those of you watching, Libby and I've known each other for about 7 years. I met her when I moved to Encinitas, North County, San Diego, and we were fast friends. And I've kind of watched you go through this transformation. And I know you'll share more of the story about kind of how you've gotten there, but it's been really beautiful to just watch kind of like the intensity of grief like become your life's purpose, like in a way. And it's been really beautiful. And I definitely want I definitely kind of want people to hear that, like of just your transformation through it. So we'll get to that for sure. Let me just share a little bit about from your bio. So for those of you watching, you know who you are listening to. She's quite an epic human. So actually, and when I met you, you were still working at the Chopra Center.
Mhm.
So she's considered a master educator at the Chopra Center and an executive and life coach in meditation. You specialize in mindfulness, Kundalini Yoga, meditation, and specializing in grief and loss, right?
Mhm.
And then you do, yeah, I know all this stuff. You do online classes, you do workshops, you do programs, you do coaching, you teach weekly classes, I think still, right? In
Mhm.
North County. Yeah. And so Libby is really good at showing people how to make peace with what's happened in the past, to make sustainable change available in the present. And we were just speaking to how uh, we want we want this interview to give you guys like practical tools of like
Mhm.
what can I do like right now, because we were just speaking to how it's not a quick process a lot of the times, and we often want something really fast to get us out of the pain, but it's often just I just want to expand the picture on this so that people have a better idea of what they can do that can potentially relieve suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to your point, in that little piece of describing the work and what I do is, grief. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me in this process has been that it well, let me start from the beginning, because not everybody ends up being someone who's passionate about grief and calling themselves a grief expert because it was on their vision board as an 18-year-old. So this is definitely not what I had expected to be, but it's absolutely who I am meant to be. And I think when you are delivered these gifts that are wrapped up in a package that you'd rather like return, or it's like return to sender. And that's what loss was like for me. And, um, you know, I could say that I didn't have a choice at the time when I went through a period of like really traumatic and very sudden losses. But it was more of, I'll take you back to, I think, probably the moment in time where everything shifted for me. And there already was a little bit of a dismantling, and that actually happened on this day 5 years ago. So it's very timely that you and I are having this conversation, because 5 years ago, I found myself in Bali and I was super stressed out. And at the time, I was the VP of sales for a wellness company for Chopra. And I was teaching, meditation and yoga, and like it was all an act at that point in my life because I was so out of balance. Um, I I can't even describe the level of being out of alignment and integrity with, who I wanted to be and then who I was showing up. And I thought that if I went to Bali, that I would have an opportunity to like, I was looking for the Instagrammable, like spiritual retreat. And I'm going to find myself and Zen and peace. And what I found is just more of the same. So I found a bunch of really hot Australian guys, tons of places to party. And it was like all the things that I was trying to avoid, here back home in San Diego, I found and then some when I was in Bali. And I remember having the realization that, like, wow, wherever you go, there you are. And when I get back home, I need to start making some changes. So I get back home, and within a couple weeks, I get a call from my mom saying that my grandfather has been moved into hospice, and would I want to come back and be with him, as he transitions. And so I got in a plane, went back to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and that was kind of the first of this like dismantling of life as I knew it. And if you've ever been in that experience before where, I actually kind of guess consider myself a little lucky because at that time I was not even 40 yet. I was maybe 38, and no one really close to me had ever, died. So I still I didn't realize it then, but I do now that I was kind of living with this invincible, like there's more than enough time to do anything I ever wanted in my life. And going through that experience and being with my grandfather, and that was really my first really touch and taste of loss. And I could feel, this is where we're going to talk about the heart chakra, but I could feel this heaviness across my chest and through the backside of my heart that I'd never experienced before. And when I close my eyes and I think about that time, because I was so, like I said, I was so disconnected from my body. I was out of integrity. I was out of alignment, and I was not connected to this physical container at all. In fact, I did everything I could to kind of disassociate from my body, but I started to feel. So I remember feeling across, across the heart and then the back. And I remember closing my eyes and I'm like, what is going on? And it was like I was shown like these iron doors for my heart. And it was like what was behind those doors was like it was almost like it was a knocking on the door. So it's like I felt like the knocking from the inside, but then I could feel like the door on the outside. I was like, I might be losing my mind in Cedar Rapids, Iowa right now. I'm not quite sure what's going on. And spending time, with my grandfather, and I was there. I actually left before he transitioned, but I was there in the hospice unit for like 3 days. And I remember as I was holding his hand, I felt like I needed to tell him everything, from what I appreciated to the things that we didn't get to do. And it was like all these communications that from out of nowhere just started pouring out. And I ended up leaving because that was also one of my conditioned tendencies. My patterns was to, things got too intense, I needed to like leave and isolate. We'll talk about that. That's one of the ways when we don't want to feel what we're feeling, especially when it comes to loss and when we're grieving. One of the biggest ones right now, and it's even magnified, during the pandemic, is isolation. Because in isolation, we're with ourselves, and there's a different level of accountability. Whereas when we're with our family or with people that really know us well, it's like looking in a mirror. We can't really avoid feeling what we're feeling. So I decide to come back to California. And what's interesting is before I left, my dad, who was also in Iowa at that time, and he was actually at my grandparents helping just to prepare the home. So when my grandma came back, that'd be a little bit easier. So my dad called me in the hospice unit. And he's like, "Hey, can I drive you to the airport?" And I was like, "No, no, no, I got it. I rented a car." And the whole time I'm thinking like, there's no way I can be with my dad right now. Like I can't keep it together. Like I'm a mess. I've got this like pounding through this steel door in my heart. I don't know what's going on. Just need to go back to my life. I need to go back to work. And what is so visceral for me still in my body to this day, and I've told this story and I've shared this, I don't know how many times, is if I would have said yes, that would have been the last time I would have been able to see my father. Because 45 days after that, my dad died in a sudden accident. And so here are two significant men in my life. One, with my grandfather and being able to be with him in that place of transitioning. And then my dad not able to, and I really do believe that, that was a gift. And I was offered a connection with my dad. And I chose to stay in this place, like behind this like steel door, because feeling that much to that capacity, literally, we could say container, we can also say nervous system. I didn't have the capacity to hold that. So how I got into this work is after my dad died, it was literally an opening where I realized a lot of the things that were going on in my life from, whether it's like out of integrity, feeling stuck in relationships in my job, feeling unfulfilled, using things to avoid feeling like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. When I was presented with loss, a lot of loss in a short period of time, I had nothing left to defend. And I have to tell you that if you're met with a catalyst like that at any time in your life, the way that I choose to look at it is a gift, because there is nothing left to defend at that point. And it's this sense of, one of my favorite teachers, Tyre Brock, talks about, and also Pema Chodron, this sense of groundlessness. And they say in those moments, it's when your prayers are most powerful, right? Because there's nothing getting in the way. Mm. And what is amazing, and what I'm so grateful to Summer for creating, is in my experience over the last 4 years, is that the most powerful work in terms of like loss and grief is done in this space of communal grieving. So yes, we can transmute, we can have these experiences on our own, but when we do it in a shared space where there's safety, because this is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I see this a lot in social media, and we're like the self-actualization. Here's the thing: if you don't feel safe, if you're not able to meet those basic needs, to be like, I need to grieve, I need to get through this, like it's not happening. We have to create the safety first, and then we can do that in community. We can do that through the practices I know that you're sharing. And then we can come back to that steel door I was mentioning, and start to begin to understand, how did we get to this armoring of the heart in the first place? Mm-hmm. So in so many words, and there were a lot that I just said, that is how I've been brought to doing this work. Because if you've read Joseph Campbell's A Hero's Journey, or you've watched any blockbuster movie, it's like, those are the stories that we want to watch, because it's like the hero going through this journey of stumbling and then getting back up. And then for me at that point, I feel after my dad's death, it's like I really decided I could either go back to where I've been and recreate that all over again, or I could venture into the unknown, that place of groundlessness, and see what waited for me. And then here we are today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Libby. I feel like there's one question. I'm scanning the questions, because there's one that goes right straight, I think, into exactly what you're talking about, which, yeah, as soon as I told everyone who I was interviewing, everyone's like, I have a question. And I have so many questions to ask you. I kind of want to jump just right in, which I feel like this one is just, it goes along with exactly what you were just saying, which is, what are the ways we can support the heart chakra when going through grief?
Yeah. So supporting, and, this is, I think, this is a good thing to remember, is that even though you may have read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's the 5 stages of, death and grieving, we'd like to think that there's a linear process for moving through this, but in my experience, it is a squiggly line. There is not
That's been
linear.
my experience too. Yeah.
It's not linear. So that's the first thing, is like, this is a non-linear process. And the other thing is, it's not mental, it's not mental, it's not intellectual. Um, Oftentimes I'll hear from people are like, how do I fix this? How do I fix my heart? How do I fix my life? And the first thing to remember is that we're not broken. And so therefore we don't need to be fixed. And to support the heart during this experience, one of I think the best things that we can do is, first of all, in Chinese medicine, the lungs holding grief and sadness. So any breath work you do at any time of loss, and especially now in 2020, during a pandemic and election and whatever you have going on in your life, it's like life as we know it is no more. And so with the breath, and even being really aware of the patterning of holding, like over the last week, I don't think I've ever held my breath as much as I have in this last year. And like, even just noticing that it's like I'm holding, like I'm bracing for like another wave of something. So there's also this, I want to talk a little bit, when I talk about how to support the heart chakra, first of all, what is grief and what are different types of losses. And then I'm going to give you some practical tools. So the first thing I want to actually give you, and actually, can I ask you a question first, Summer? Because I'm curious how you might answer this,
Yeah.
which is, how would you define grief?
Oh, it's a great question. I've never been asked that question before, to be honest. Um, Grief, God.
I mean, that's a good definition.
Yeah, it's like, ugh, like, that's my definition. No, yeah, like the emotion of loss is what it feels
Mhm.
like.
Yeah. So first of all, however you chose, that are watching, to answer that, um, it's right and it's correct for you. So I want to expand a little bit your perspective on grief. And that's going to come through a couple different ways to define it, although it's really undefinable. And these come from the Grief Recovery Method Handbook. And the grief recovery method is actually a method that I'm trained in. It was one of the first trainings I did around grief, and it's incredible. Very practical application to grief, and I'm going to share some of those things with you. But here's how they define grief. Grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss of any kind. So, therefore, the feelings you have are also normal and natural for you. Grief is also the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. We grieve the loss of all relationships. So, this is people, places, pets, things that we deem emotional. And then unresolved grief. And this is what I had, again, a very visceral experience with after my dad died, is that feeling of incompleteness after a loss. And it's almost always about the things we wish we'd said or done differently, better, or more.
Mhm.
So the conflicting feelings piece, and this is really interesting. And I think for everyone listening, and this is how, like, I hope after this experience, you are able to expand your container, and also I look at this too, of being able to widen my window of tolerance. So within my nervous system, so that I can have the capacity to hold conflicting feelings. So I think here in the West, let me explain this, is like, I think here in the West, we're kind of like, I'm either happy or sad. So it's like we're either one or the other,
Mhm.
versus I can give an example of, the pandemic maybe. And for me, working from home, is that, I'm grateful that we have things like this where I can connect with you and your community. And it's like, there's the opportunity to share, this, digitally and virtually. And I'm really devastated about not being able to connect within community and gather in groups and see my friends and see my families in the way that I once was. So it's like I have these conflicting emotions. And what I see in clients when I'm first working with them is like we'll use the pandemic again as an example is I'm so grateful that I have a home and I have got food and I have a job. Um, and then they'll minimize or invalidate the emotions of feeling disappointed or feeling isolated or feeling disconnected. And that's the thing is whatever you're feeling is valid. So we really want to be able to, and again, this gets into the heart chakra, right? Because I want to talk a little bit about the shadow and the light side of the heart as an archetype. But it's about how can I hold the space for there to be conflicting feelings? And I think even just being curious, like, is that even possible for me? Moves you in the direction to be able to feel both at the same time and stay connected to your experience.
Mhm.
Yeah. Is this making perfect sense?
Yeah, and I can experience it right now. Like my divorce personally was final like a week ago, and so it's this experience of enjoying the newness of single summer, and also in any moment can tap into the heartbreak like that. And
Yeah.
tap into the grief like that. And so it's a beautiful thing to hear too, that that's not wrong. That
Mhm.
like you can feel both things. And because I'm somebody who, and so I've learned about myself, I knew this about myself, but I really just learned it about myself this summer, is that I'm someone who will just go, and I'm very aware a lot of women aren't like this, but I go straight into the intensity of emotion and just go all the way through it until I'm exhausted,
Mhm.
and so I kind of like learned that about myself, to where I just spent basically, 4 months in dealing with like basically anger and grief, and
Mhm.
so then coming out of it, it's like when you start to get some relief, you start to come up for air like a little bit and start feeling like, oh, I actually felt joy today. It's
Mhm.
lovely. Like to feel my heart's actually working again is what it kind of feels like if
Yeah.
I feel happy, and I just still feel, and so I go with that, but then I still just always am, I feel very committed to being available for like when
Mhm.
those waves of grief come through, and then that's when I just give myself alone time and do my inner child work and hold her in those ways. So it's just really beautiful to hear that, because
Yeah.
it's totally been my experience, as of just very recently, of just conflicting feelings of like excited and happy for the new, and then just like, God, like, am I ever gonna like, is there ever gonna be enough crying, like to
Mhm.
process this amount of heartbreak? Like, yeah.
Yeah. And you so beautifully articulated from your heart and with your words, a very powerful guide through feeling, because grief to me is really about getting better at feeling. And I believe that if you feel it, it belongs. So anger, for example, when I was talking about the steel door and like the knocking from the inside, is um anger for me. So there was like the surface anger, but then there was this inner anger that really started to surface for me after and I really was in a period of disbelief after my dad died, because the accident, it was out of the blue, there were so many layers. And so it kind of kept in this, like, because we really do, especially when there's a traumatic loss or we get news out of the blue. And I see this a lot with relationships where there's, a change we didn't ask for, we're served a divorce. And it's like, wait, what? Like, how is this happening out of the blue? And the we want to know why, right? We want to know why. So this is the other thing too, as we work towards anger, is there's something really interesting, and we actually have a lot of really great neuroscience right now, which is giving us more information on what happens in the brain, in the body, this biological response to loss. And so when there's a change or a change that we didn't ask for, it's literally, we register it, the brain registers it as an error. And it's like we can't really move forward until we get that thing fixed.
Mm.
So when I have people say, like, I just can't move on, and I'm like, first of all, let's look at biologically why that is actually true. So this is actually, let's normalize what's happening. So for all of you who've experienced loss or going through it, like, let's normalize grief. Let's normalize the fact that we can't see the silver lining within 5 minutes of learning from a loss, and actually going to what's the gift in this? What's the deeper meaning? Is shorting ourselves of the gift that grief has to offer.
Mhm.
Like, in order to find the meaning, we have to first go through the feeling. And like you said, processing and feeling that all the way through is so beautiful. And, anger is very intelligent. And especially, say something like in a relationship, it shows us, it's like this reclamation of power. And it shows us where were those boundaries crossed.
Mhm.
Right. And it is, in a way, for us, and for many people I've worked with, it's like that reclamation of power. It's finding the voice. And then for many, and I've worked with many clients that will stay in the anger piece because they know what's underneath that, which is the deep, deep sadness.
Yeah.
And so when we're in anger, it's almost like it's we're slowing, we're kind of, I don't want to say slowing the process down, because we're not, there's no slowing, but it's like, whether you're conscious of it or not, on the other side of that underneath is going to be, really the sadness and the heartbreak. And it's incredible. Like, I've been learning a lot about my own anger, and how, when I, especially as a child, and I'd be curious to see what you think about this, Summer, but when I didn't have a voice, right? And I moved back to that conditioned tendency of just getting really pissed off. I have to remind myself that I'm now an adult, that knows how to set healthy boundaries.
Mhm.
I can do that versus moving into, anger. But it's like the grief really and loss gives us an opportunity to, emotional, maturity, and to grow up into our beingness, into our feeling capacity, which is powerful.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, like, for you and anger, did you find that underneath that there are all these gifts
Mhm.
in different packages waiting for you?
This is like a whole hour topic in and of itself for me. Very, um, me and anger are pretty tight at this point. I, just for me, like, I would just wake up with, so this is specifically going through my recent divorce, but I would just wake up with, it would either be an incredible amount of heart anxiety or an incredible amount of like anger and rage. And all I
Mm,
knew to do, because it was so intense, and I knew it was the grief underneath it, but that I had to move the energy of anger first, I would just go throw myself in the ocean. And then I have this process that I'm going to share
yeah.
eventually anyways, but where I would just like pull the anger up from the solar plexus to the heart, and like take a big
Mhm.
inhale and then go under the water. And then, you can send it from the heart to the hands and just, and just whatever. And then I just come up for air and then do it again. And then I just would do it until I was exhausted. And then I would just come up, and I would just, and the ocean's such a beautiful place, like, because she can
Mhm.
just hold it. And then as soon as I was kind of exhausted from the anger, every time, just I would stop and I would breathe and I would calm, and then the grief would come, and then the
Mm,
crying would come. So it's just over and over again. I could see that like the anger is such a protective mechanism for us to not feel that deep sadness,
yeah.
grief, and loss.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Wow, what a beautiful process. And, in other ways to really support the heart, in answer to your question, as you brought in, the arms and the hands, the extension of the heart, Kundalini Yoga, which I have Summer to thank for. Yeah, I was in between, my grandfather, my father, and then leaving Chopra. I was like, I want to do a training. I want to do an immersion. Summer, any ideas? You're like, yeah, Kia Miller, Kundalini. And I went and I was there at an ashram in Pennsylvania for a month and fell in love with Kundalini. And that practice for me was life changing because the first it was really the first experience in my life where I really felt the strengthening within my nervous system, where I could, especially doing the heart work, because my conditioned tendency is to move into freeze mode. So I would just shut down, And so and I'm curious too, for anybody watching, like I have been in and out of talk therapy, for half of my life. And I really feel, looking back on it, it wasn't successful for me in the way that I had envisioned because I didn't have the nervous system to hold change, and I also wasn't really ready to do that deep work because, again, go back to these steel doors of the heart. And so in the Grieve Better course that I have, which is I do this in person in North County and then online. We're going to be launching it in December. One of the first things that we do is we have people really get curious about when I'm feeling like I'm out of my window of tolerance, meaning it's too much information. I can't digest it. Like, what do I do? So that they can identify, up front, okay, well, I do this, I zone out, I eat, I sleep, I isolate, so that you've got this list of, okay, here are the things that I do, so that we can create practices so that when you're diving into this heart work. Someone once said, like, Libby, this is really hard work. I was like, you mean heart work? And they're like, I see what you're doing there, but it's still hard. But when you dive into the heart work, it's like, it's, we got to have the container to be able to hold the change, to hold the space for feeling. Um, and so I really appreciate you sharing, your process, because that kind of, and I do this a lot where it's like, I'll do, if we have time for it, we'll do it, but there's a practice, the vitamin C breath. And then at the end, we're holding the breath and we're shaking the body. And it's like, and I can just feel these channels open up and come into, it's like my heart, you're talking about joy. It's like, I know whenever I'm shaking that out, it's like, I now have this greater capacity for joy that I didn't even know possible
Right.
because of softening into and meeting grief in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a huge gift in it. And I feel like for me, I was sharing this with you before this, but going through this grief process for me and holding myself in the way that I was in a way forced to hold myself through this
Yeah.
process, and healing the like wound of abandonment. It absolutely, it was the biggest gift ever, because I now feel like I'm the secure adult for my inner child, for my little girl. And there's no, it's like it's like, it's almost like, my ex and I walked each other to the end of the road of codependence, and
Wow.
then it's like, so okay, now learn. And this is why I feel like you called to share tools and practices and things that I used, like, to get myself through this time, because there's such an intensity to it.
Hmm.
I honestly felt like at some point, if I didn't have the tools, I would have had them. Like, I would have been panic attack, like checking myself into the hospital, like some, I couldn't eat or
Hmm.
sleep. I mean, it was just such an intensity to it. um, and yeah, I just feel like it's so important, like these tools that actually just move energy and just work somatically, just with the
Hmm.
body, and get you out of the story and out of the head, especially for those of us, like you just shared, Libby, that have that tendency to go into that freeze mode, which is also my tendency. So for any of you watching, that if you were, a little one, and like your tendency was just to kind of lock up because your
Hmm.
emotions weren't ever met as a child, and so you kind of go into like a freeze pattern. It's so difficult when you're in that pattern to move. Like, all you want to do
Yeah.
is just kind of like be in bed and curled up. It's so hard to move the body, but it's like absolutely like the thing that like breaks the loop in the brain.
Yeah.
And I feel like Kundalini in a way is this beautiful practice for that, because a lot of it's sitting. You can just
Yeah.
sit in a chair and like do some breath work and do some movement with your arms, and it's so fast and it's so effective at
Hmm.
moving. And then it just sort of like gets you out of that mental component, which when I first learned Kundalini, I was like, what the hell is this? And what is going on with like the sequencing and the alignment? Like, this doesn't make any sense to my physical therapy brain. It's like, what's happening? And then I just would feel so good, like after the practice, that it just kept me going back and kept me going back. So I feel like it is like some of these practices, they're so simple. You can do something for like 3 minutes and be like cleared, and
Yeah.
it's like everyone should just have these tools.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I think it's for me, it was the missing component with a lot of the work that I was doing. And to your point, it's like it's Kundalini every time I practice and I teach, I started teaching when we had the stay-at-home order here. And so I've been teaching online on the fireplace ended. Hold on. I've got this fireplace in the background. And when it ends, it goes to commercial. Um, but the practice is like it's like a 90-minute pattern interrupt. It's just like interrupting those patterns. And the piece I think is really helpful for everyone to know is yes, we experience it in the body. We're experiencing that in the heart. Our um when there is a loss or a change in any normal pattern, of behavior, we're going to feel a loss of safety, potentially a loss of trust, a loss of control, a loss of identity. And often, and there's this whole idea that, and really before I experienced and started to like explore loss and grief, I thought it was kind of very specific to like, the losing a loved one. It was death. And what I've realized is it's any ending. And it is um it is endings, it is things not turning out the way that we thought they were going to. It's unmet hopes, dreams, and expectations. It's anything you wish was different, better, or more.
Mhm.
Particularly here in the West, we tend to invalidate or minimize that. So then we're grieving undercover, right? Or we're suppressing it because the people around us, we're comparing our situation to others. It's like, well, my situation is not as bad as theirs, so I shouldn't be feeling the way that I'm feeling. And here's the thing, if you're feeling it, it belongs. A big piece of that I work with is how people come to me and they're like, kind of embarrassed to tell you why I'm here. And I'm like, okay, I tell me. And it's the loss of a pet.
Mhm.
And I got to tell you, pets are like the portal of unconditional love. And most people, and we're going to do this right now, Summer, is um, how you approach change and change you didn't ask for right now in this moment has a lot to do with your first loss. I know that you do a lot of inner child and reparenting. So, what I like to look at and what we talk about in the Grieve Better course, so that it can really inform you to how you're navigating change in the present, is allowing yourself to go back to, what do you remember about the first loss? And for most people, it's the loss of a pet. It was for me. And what I learned from that loss was grieve alone. Um, that, my emotions were too big for the adults around me. So I needed to do it, in isolation, to just replace the loss because there was a new dog or a new cat, not long thereafter. And oftentimes we don't even address the loss. We just replace it. We move on. We stay strong. We don't feel bad. So we do things to like feel good. And I find, for many of the humans that I work with that are pet parents, is that, pets also, because of the unconditional love that they offer, they're also often a portal for us to grieve all of the other losses we didn't give ourselves permission to. And so, pets, and I was recently on a friend's, she did a Facebook Live and she's amazing. Sama Dog is the name of her company. And she teaches Ayurveda for pets and their humans. And we were talking about, pet loss. and how, this is one of those losses that is often minimized or not deemed grievable in public. But here's the thing. This is where I want to change the narrative and really normalize grief. And that's also the whether it's say a miscarriage or abortion, or anything where you tell yourself like it's not that bad, or there's any minimizing or invalidation, is just give yourself the opportunity. We talked about the conflicting feelings, giving yourself the space to feel, even if, and especially when the people around you don't get it. Because let me tell you, until you have, experienced loss or a catalyst, no matter how well you describe it to somebody else, unless they've actually been there and experienced it, we think, like I experienced this after my dad died. I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, welcome to the club. I was like, what club? They're like, the Dead Dads Club. And I was like, I do not want to be in this club. I'm like, can I cancel my membership? And that was followed with like, I know exactly how you're feeling. And I was like, you do? You know exactly how I'm feeling. And that is, again, another way that we minimize people's experience, because here's the thing, we have no idea. Even if we had, kind of same relationship with our parent, a similar loss, we, our relationship to that person, place, or thing is very unique. And what was left, unmet hopes, dreams, and expectations is going to be different. And we have no idea how anybody else is feeling. All we know is how we felt at the time of our loss. So that's why one of the best things that we can say to somebody is like, God, I can't imagine how you're feeling. I know how I felt at the time of my loss. It's like giving people the space to really feel seen and heard, versus, sometimes people will go towards, and especially with pets, they'll be like, oh, well, you can get a new one. Or with a partner, oh, well, when are you going to start dating again? It's like, this is not about replacing the lost people, but because we think that loss is something that we can fix, we're going to approach it as we do, many other things. And I'm seeing 2020 and 2021 is the year that there's going to be an unwinding and unraveling of that approach to loss and grief.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely needed. And I feel like it's where, at least in my experience, it's where the inner child work and the reparenting became so important, because I had such a feeling that, oh my God, like no one can help me. No one can
Right.
even meet me in this. Like it's so intense. Like I had some people that I thought would be there for me like the most out of anyone I knew. And they'd be like, yeah, I just have to have some boundaries with this because it's affecting my energy field so much. And it's just like, okay. And I knew it was intense, and because
Mhm.
I knew what I was going through, and it was just fucking intense. There's just no way around it. And the best thing I feel like that anybody could do, because nobody has the right words for you, um, barely anyone, I feel, the best
Yeah.
thing I feel like is just to hold presence with that person, and like exactly what you said, like allow them to feel held and to feel seen and to feel
Mhm.
acknowledged, like in their pain and in their grief and in the suffering. And because and that's it was really clear for me, because it was such a feeling of like, oh, it's like my little girl feeling like, where is everyone and why isn't anyone standing up for me? And like, wait, what? Like it was this like real, I could just feel
Yeah.
like the inner dialogue of my little girl became very loud,
Yeah.
and I could just feel it. And I was just like, oh, and then that's when I had to do, I was just on it. Like I was telling you, 110%, like every waking hour, at least once an hour, I was like checking in with her, just for a really long months and months and months, like until she wasn't screaming at me,
Yeah.
like to let her feel, this loss, because my particular loss was this deep trauma bond. And
Yeah.
like the loss of like the little girl grieving the loss of her caregiver. So it's very,
Mhm.
very intense, that attachment loss. So yeah, I feel like it's right on. Everything you're saying is right on. Um,
Yeah, and you also, I hope you all heard what Summer just said, because this going back to how we started, our time together, I was sharing how the communal grieving and this beautiful group of women that you've gathered are now more than ever so important, because when we can hold space for others
Mhm.
without fucking feeling our urge to fix them, because again, that is about you. It's not about them at all. And that's the other thing, is like, this is how, whether it's being a friend or a facilitator, it's like, how can and that's the other thing with grief, is like, I continue to work on myself every single day in terms of loss and grief, because I want to be a clear channel, because it is so easily to be impacted by somebody else's story. And when that happens, that is impacting you for a reason, because it's showing you that you have something unresolved.
Mhm.
And nothing ever goes away until you, again, like that door, you open it up and you see who's there. So it's not the other people, because I had this experience too of, where it's like, you know, we are going to be continued to triggered by other people's stories, because there's something unresolved within us. And we should get excited about that, because, oh my God, there's more. That unresolved piece is absolutely diminishing your quality of presence.
Mhm.
And so when you look at it like that, it's like, okay, this unresolved thing, if I can move from emotionally incomplete to being emotionally complete, more capacity for presence, more capacity for feeling.
Yeah.
So the ability to be seen and heard and held and appreciated, and to allow that to happen with somebody like you are right now, just listening. Oh my gosh, the whole nervous system strengthening, heart opening. Here's what I have from my little girl that I actually brought, that's sitting and watching me right now.
Mhm.
I bought this. I bought this after my dad died.
Oh, cute.
So this is my 4-year-old right here. But just holding this and talking and feeling that comfort, it was the best talk therapy I ever spent. This was the best $78 I ever spent. $78 teddy bear. I was like, I'm grieving over this loss of
Teddy bear.
$78.
Well, I'm really glad you brought it up, Libby, because it's something I have to catch a lot, and sometimes I just have to let it go. But in circle, where someone's crying, and particularly thinking of this one woman in my circle that has a hard time accessing her tears and her sadness. She starts to cry in circle, and then somebody immediately wants to say something to bring, and I'm like, zip it, don't
Yeah.
say anything, because it'll bring her out of it like that, because that's her
Yep.
tendency, is to avoid it. And so it's so, and like I try constantly to like, but it's hard in the moment, and it takes seconds to take someone out of their feeling,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
And so I'm always like, just let her feel, don't try to fix it, don't try to make her feel better. Can you just be with her sadness? Can you just be
Yeah.
with her accessing her challenge of accessing her sadness, or her grief? And we do it all the time, I think, in just regular conversation, but it shows up in circle a lot. And I say it all the time, and I've said don't do it, and we still do it, and so it's
Yeah.
just a common thing. um
Yeah, and to that, so like with the circles that I lead, and also with Grieve Better, it's and this is talked about in the Grief Recovery Handbook, is no one else's opinion. Like, there's nothing you can say, there's nothing that you can do. And the people who are, and I was definitely one of those people at one point, that are so uncomfortable with vulnerability, that it's like, oh my God, like, when we are feeling really, really seen, and it's like, it's too much. It's like, look at your conditioned tendency. What do you do? And that's the other thing in when we're having in person, is like, there's no touching, because the moment you touch somebody, what does it do? Even if it's like, well, I want to comfort them. Okay, well, first of all, they weren't asking for your comfort. And second of all, the moment we place the hand on somebody, what does it do, whether we're conscious of it or not, is that I'm doing something wrong and I need to stop. So it stops that feeling, it stops that flowing. And that was really difficult for many people in my groups to understand. I mean, I had one person who I was like, listen, like, we might have to duct tape your mouth. Like, I know that you're trying to. And they were down for it because they really wanted to shift and change. But it was like, they're like, but I can just see. And I'm like, you literally have no idea what they're feeling. All you know is what you felt at the time of your loss. So, can you be with your own discomfort? Like, can you hold yourself through this process? And I feel like what you're doing, Summer, and as we move through the end of this year in 2021, those who are able to sit with themselves and it's the survival of the most nurtured, those are the ones that are going to thrive,
Mm,
you
beautifully.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We've just been this has been awesome. And I have so many questions. So
Okay. Yes. All right.
let's start nailing them. Let's see how
Okay.
many we
Let's do it.
Okay. Here's one. What are ways I can stop separating my grief from others' grief and therefore start giving myself the same advice I would give to others about moving forward? And if any of these, Libby, you feel like you've kind of answered already, just you
Yeah.
can say that and we'll just move on.
So I think this one specifically, after like if you listen to what we just talked about, which is no advice giving, really listening deeply to people, which mean doesn't offering your evaluation of what they just said. Like there's literally no advice that you can give somebody. And I think one of the most damaging things we can do is that if after somebody shares their heart and really what's in their experience, to then turn it around and be like, I know exactly how you're feeling when I was blah, blah, blah. It's like, we're not talking about you. You're just like holding space.
Yeah.
So I would say just sit with that. And it's like, I mean, I'm kind of giggling when I say this because like I was that person that people would open up to and I'd be like, I know exactly what you should do. It's a 5-point plan. And it's like, it's a bullshit plan. It's like, that's a mental thing. This
Great.
is, you're not broken, right? So you don't need to be fixed. Like, can you listen? Grief Recovery Handbook talks about this as a heart with ears. So listen from here.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm. That's awesome. Okay. What are ways I can stay in the place of peaceful understanding with my loss or get back into that space when I've spiraled back into deep sadness?
Yeah. Um, I so for me, mindfulness is everything. Mindfulness is a practice in I'm studying right now with Tara Brach and Jack Cornfield and the RAIN technique, which is a wonderful way of, exploring emotions and feelings and our inner environment is really powerful. So I would look at and you can just find RAIN. It's an acronym for, really recognize and being with what's there, allowing. So this is when we're feeling in resistance, we're not saying what's happening is right or wrong, but we're saying, yes, this is happening. And then the investigation, the I is for investigation and just inquiry to what's happening in my body. So we're bringing, again, the attention when I feel like when there's the anger or the memorized resentment, it's a very mental. There's a thinking, feeling, we're having feelings about our thoughts and we stay in that loop. So to get out of the loop and to come back into the body and then come into the end for the nurturing and compassion for self. You can do that in a 15-minute process. And sometimes I'll do it in a matter of 60 seconds, but it brings me back to I'm in this with myself as I, navigate and like really metabolize this life experience.
I think another piece I just want to add to that is like, don't make yourself wrong, like for feeling it, which you've already
Yeah.
said many times, Libby, which is so true. But I feel like people just throw that second dart on themselves of
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm feeling this way, but then they make themselves wrong for feeling that way. So I just feel like that's so common, So it's like
Yeah.
what you're saying to actually just like allow yourself to hold yourself,
Right.
and oftentimes it's can you hold, the youngest part of you that felt this way, and then
Yeah.
and then I've said this in other interviews, but it's like, can you reach for this like kind of evolved, compassionate, really authentic way of parenting that maybe you weren't modeled, like
Yeah.
to your inner child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is really hard because we were shown something opposite. We don't even know what that is. So it's like this, well, how would I want to do if this was my child grieving it? It's like treating that and holding the inner child in the way that you would have wanted to be held.
Yeah. Yeah. I love like just that expansion of, how to be able to be with ourselves. And I would also say from the perspective of like toxic positivity and like the good vibes only culture and spiritual bypassing is like,
Just
you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it
I
is,
know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
it's like it's vibes, period. It's like some of them are good, some of them are angry, some of them are resentment. And it's like I keep coming back to what we've been talking about is if you're feeling it, it belongs, and what we resist persists. So being able to be with it, I think, the rain technique is a really wonderful way to, be with yourself in a constructive versus a destructive way.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. In what ways can grief permanently change us?
Well, I would just listen to this whole interview again, and so you can hear Summer and I share different ways. I would say, very simply for me, it the experience of loss has completely been a gain for me. Like I just recognize how it's, looking at polarities and, I want to have a full, rich life of experience. And that means peaks and valleys and everywhere in between. And this experience has really allowed me to see, first of all, the capacity for resilience. And then how through each experience, it's given me so many gifts that I'm able to share with others. And the greater capacity for joy, a lot more joy in my life now, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of want to answer that because I feel like it's really relevant to me. But I would say, like, grief could like if I just tune into my recent experience, it's just like it actually just brought me back to myself.
Yes.
And into my own sovereignty and into my own ability to nurture and hold myself, which is
Mhm.
the biggest gift in it all. And I keep saying this, but it's like, oh my God, like the biggest gift of this divorce is that I am now the secure parent for my little girl. And
Mhm.
if anyone has a wounded little girl inside of them, then that's a really big freaking gift. It's a really big
Yeah.
gift. So I feel like, yeah, it just brings you back to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Really beautiful.
Yeah. Let's see. Is it helpful or not so helpful to surround yourself with reminders? Mm.
Wow, that's a great question that in order to really answer it, I'd probably need a little bit more context. But here's what I would say, and this is really interesting, is whether it's the ending of a relationship, the death of a loved one, the ending of a job, um, it if the going back to kind of we were talking about the rain technique and suffering is I think sometimes, and this was my experience after my dad died, because it was the first time that I'd really felt, because I was so numb and disassociated from my experience, that I would use memories or things of my dad to kind of trigger just feeling anything, even if that feeling was like guttural and painful. And that worked until it didn't work anymore. But I would say when you go through a process of like keeping reminders, one of the things that I teach in the Grieve Better process is one of the things that keeps us stuck is all these undelivered communications. So anytime there's an ending, and I'll use relationship as an example, is we feel like it's like I need to tell them, I need to write them a letter, they need to understand, they need to see me. Here's the thing. Um, they probably don't have the capacity to meet you where you are. And of course, it would be nice to think that, like, yes, this will come into culmination and I'll get closure, but I have yet to meet anybody where that has actually happened. And we give ourselves closure by, first of all, identifying what are these undelivered communications. What did we either say that we didn't feel like we were heard or seen, or we never said? And it's the things we need to apologize for. It's the things that we need to forgive so that we can be free. It's all the things that we wish were different, better, or more. It's the unmet hopes, dreams, and expectations for that relationship. And when in grief recovery, they talk about these as the recovery components. And a lot of these are usually what keeps us feeling emotionally incomplete. So I have with clients too, especially when you have somebody where it's like a triage where they're like, I need to see somebody today. I'll have them go through and I'm like, put it all on paper, like put it all on paper. And if there's the significant emotional statements like, I hated when you slammed the door in my face that one time. It's like you have to have on the other end of that forgive. Otherwise, we stay in the victim and the blaming. And it's like, you eventually move to that piece of forgiveness. And it's like, and I forgive you so that I can be free. Because, that anger and that tethering, it's like, again, we say that we stay there because in the release or the metabolizing of the anger into forgiveness, underneath that, what do we have? We have the deep, the heartbreak, the disappointment. So it's just kind of understanding like anger serves its purpose. But we can give ourselves more space by just looking at I do the undelivered communications on relationships all the time. And I find it helps me keep it clear then in my current relationships because I'm not bringing all this garbage into, the present experience that happened maybe 10 years ago. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And I'm glad you brought up forgiveness. And literally just last night I'm doing Lee Harris's empaths versus narcissists course. And it had write out. It was like write down everything you like wouldn't actually say to them, but that you would want to say. And I like just did this last night and I'd done it before, but I did it again. But that piece of I forgive you because I want to set myself free, I feel like is so huge
Yes.
because, and this is what he talks about too in that course, is that forgiveness it doesn't make it right.
Mhm.
It doesn't make anything that happened right, which I feel like is often why we don't want to forgive because we're
Yeah.
like, we don't want, that's not okay. That was not okay. Um, but that it frees us like from all of that poison. And so I love how like the little this right at the end of like, fuck you and your whatever. I'm gonna forgive you for these things.
And I forgive you so that I can be free. And then here's the thing too about forgiveness is, and I think forgiveness is something that, only recently have I really been able to be in the experiencing. Cause, I think a lot of, even what we're talking about right now, until you experience it, it's an intellectual idea. But then you get thrown into the fire, right? You get thrown into the groundlessness, and then you're in the experiencing of it. And the experiencing of forgiveness for me is yes, I do these processes. Yes, I write down, I forgive you so that I can be free. And then the universe brings me an opportunity where I could get hooked back into a way of relating with, say, a certain person. And now I'm going to pause and I've got a choice here. I can either hook back in or I can pause. Again, and even if it's just a pause for a couple seconds and I still get hooked, at least I'm creating a little bit of space of not doing the same old thing in the same old way. And that I think is the practice of like not reaching for the ruminating thoughts because, the brain, like I said, it's like when there's a change, it's like it reads it as an error and it's like, I can't move on until this gets corrected. It's like we keep building that capacity of like not taking the bait, and choosing ourselves instead, which is, again, easier said than done, but so powerful in practice.
Okay, let's see. Why does grief hurt so much? Why does grief hurt so much like a hole in my heart that nothing but time can heal? This is a very mental question.
Yeah. I
Why does it hurt so bad? Why is there so much?
Yeah, and how I would answer that, and this is, I have no idea. I can't imagine what you're feeling. All I know is how, um, what the pain and suffering felt like for me. And being on, I don't want to say on the other side, but in a different experiencing, the way that I relate to my life experience is that pain and suffering actually was about me and my capacity of feeling. I was able to feel that deeply because I loved something so much. And again, easier said than done. And so, what was the other half of the question?
It was just, why does grief hurt so much, like a hole in my heart that nothing but time can heal?
Okay, the time piece, that's what I wanted to talk about is, that's another myth around grief and loss is that, with time, things will be healed. No, through appropriate action of, really discovering what has been left emotionally incomplete and then taking, the steps and the accountability and moving towards emotional completion, is that return to wholeness. Time doesn't do anything, unless you're actually doing something with it.
That's very well said, and I can see that in clients that I have too. If you're not taking right action, you
Yeah.
stay in the same loop over and over again. That feels very, very true. Um,
Mhm.
let's see what is the best way to recover from a deep loss? I'm going to say just like rewind and keep listening, like to the interview, unless you want to add something to that. Some of these are going to be kind of redundant, I feel, for what
Yeah,
you.
I think one of the best ways is to find your community. Grieving in isolation, I think is it's one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about creating a community online for grievers, grieve better, because even if we're in a circle and we're just listening to other people, there's a recognizing that like I'm not in this alone. Like I'm not an alien. Other people are having, maybe it looks a little bit different, but we're all having this shared experience in grief. And like that, I think is one of the most important things that you can do in looking for resources. There's lots of different people that you can follow on social media. You please, I hope that we follow each other and are together because we really are better together as we navigate loss.
Yeah, that's such good advice.
Yeah.
um, how do we access acceptance?
So I think going back to the forgiveness piece that we were just talking about is, I think acceptance is not saying it was right or wrong. And we're talking about the rain technique too, which is just allowing, because when we're in that resistance, and I'm finding this the more and more, as I study, especially, in this practice of mindfulness is, mindfulness is not about, for me, about finding the peace in every moment. It's about being at peace with what I'm experiencing right now. Right. Which to me means that like this is happening. I may not like that it's happening, but I'm not resisting the fact that this indeed is happening in this moment right now. And again, easier said than done. But just remembering that the resistance is really limiting our capacity of presence, and it requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of energy to resist. Oh my gosh!
Oh my
And then,
gosh, yes.
and you know what just came to me is with the acceptance. Um, is acceptance, I find, is a lot easier for us to practice when we have really gotten clear on our boundaries.
Mm.
So when we have, our healthy boundaries, then we know what is okay and what is not okay, where I end and you begin. And then acceptance to me is not something I have to think about. It's something that happens because I've established that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I've learned through studying like all the attachment style stuff that someone who, if you're someone that tends to have avoidant tendencies,
Yeah.
where it's really difficult to feel or identify your emotions and communicate them, then it's actually harder on the nervous system for those people. Even though from the outside, it almost they look those people look withdrawn and like they're not feeling anything, they're repressing so deeply that it's actually harder on the nervous system to keep it all in. That was really interesting to learn. I went
Yeah.
through the emotionally focused therapy with Dr. Sue Johnson's work. She talks quite a bit about that. And I was like, oh, it's actually really nice to hear, because if you are dealing with anyone in your life that tends to be avoidant, it doesn't look like that. It looks like
Yeah.
they're checked out. It looks like they've withdrawn, that they're not even dealing with it. But in actuality, like their nervous system is so taxed because the amount of repression they're doing.
Yeah. And as somebody who you just described like 5 or 6 years ago, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
But it's like it feels really exhausting, but it looks on the outside very different. And that's so interesting to me as we start to, as you unpack and we learn these things. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Let's see. And maybe you already addressed this. Someone was said, I would love guidance in grieving for an abortion.
So with the I think the exercise that I was talking about with the undelivered communications is a great way to give space. And, abortion is also, this isn't abortion, miscarriage, the inability to have children. There's a lot of things. This could be a whole 4-day series workshop as well. It's about giving ourselves permission to grieve
Mhm.
and also recognizing. I think it's really important too at any time, where you're experiencing a loss or you're sharing, is like, know your audience. So if you're expecting somebody who hasn't been there for you the last 1,000 times to meet you now in a space of loss, don't be surprised when they're not able to meet you this time. And again, that goes back to the reparenting and the inner child. And I think finding there's a lot of groups out there too, um, for more of the disenfranchised grief, so that you can recognize that you're not alone, and come together. And so I think working with the undelivered communications around, you know, um, the different, better, more, unmet hopes, dreams, and expectations, apologies, and forgives. And then also looking at too, especially if there's a loss where you feel it's either minimized or invalidated, is also exploring the element of shame, from the healthy shame to the toxic shame, because that also for me has really, shame is something I actually experienced that really rose up for me throughout my grieving process. Actually, really into it right now the last 6 months, which has been really interesting too.
Mm, that's like
Yeah.
a whole nother interview.
That's like a 30-day
Yeah,
workshop.
exactly. We have one on anger. We have one on shame. I don't know, Libby, we
Just
might
keep
be coming
going.
up with something here. Yeah, we might have to do a retreat or something on.
Yes, I agree. I'm
Um,
down.
okay, here's one. Would really love to know the best way to access grief that is stored in the body when it has been suppressed.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to at the start of our interview, we were talking about Kundalini Yoga.
Mhm.
And it may feel a little counterintuitive because it's a very, at times, vigorous practice. But what I found is that the stronger my nervous system got, the more that I could release and relax and let go.
Mhm.
And so the softness, and sometimes gutturalness of, moving grief through the body, it was like this balance between, and everyone's a little bit different. I think, I have some clients that are more drawn towards more restorative or yin yoga, where they can relax in those places. And as they relax, it's like they can just feel the patterns of holding start to release. And this is something too that would be interesting for us to also do a year-long workshop on, which is how, in my experience with somatic coaching, is people literally change shape as they go through my course. I mean, it's like, it blows my mind. I'm going to start this thing now where I have people take a picture on, like, the first session and the last one. It's like there's more lightness that radiates through. Their faces change. I mean, people sometimes lose weight, like their whole shape changes, because as we were saying, like holding on, that resistance, it's amazing what happens when we start to let go. So I would say for some of the practices, like whether it's Kundalini or a yin yoga, I think the nervous system release work is also a really wonderful way of giving you access. And then any type of breath work.
Mhm.
Um, I love sharing with clients long, deep breathing. I think it's incredibly restorative. And I believe how we breathe is how we grieve. So really focusing on the inhale, like increasing your capacity to take in, and then also on the exhale, having people draw the belly back towards the spine, really let go, like exhaling completely. And that is, I think, really indicative to our, the cycle of life as we move through change. In Kundalini, the mantra sa ta na ma, birth, life, death, rebirth. So you can start to see your breath as that cycle of life. And then without thinking your way into how do I bring up grief, it's more about starting just to feel into the body and getting better at feeling, I think, is a great way to move into it.
And just focusing on physical sensation, I feel like, because when you're
Yeah.
so immersed in grief, you're like, oh, I feel sadness, or I feel anxious, or I feel loss, or whatever like the emotional qualities are. But I feel like when you can ask someone, like, and I'll do this a lot in my somato emotional release sessions, of like, well, what are the adjectives that describe, well, I'll have them access the emotion first and the emotional adjectives that they're feeling, but then it's like, well, where is that being held in the body? And if you're
Yeah.
relaxed enough and you ask that question, there's going to be a physical location that comes to the forefront of your awareness. And then once you bring your presence there, then you can ask, okay, well, then what are the physical sensations, that I feel here? Then that might be, oh, there's like a tightness in my chest,
Yeah.
or even they get images like what you're describing with the iron walls in the heart. I've had people describe a shield in front of the heart, or a
Yeah.
fire like in the gut, or yeah. So I want to like empower everyone that's watching this, that it's not like rocket science. It's literally just being still enough and asking the
Mhm.
right questions of like, what do I feel emotionally? Where do I hold it in the body? And then what are the physical sensations of it? And then just literally focusing on it. Like there's
Yeah.
a whole book on it's just called focusing, that where it's just about focusing on the location of the body. And I did that like before I got into the somatic work, and it would work. It was just like, if you spend 20 minutes just focusing on whatever the discomfort is, like,
Yeah.
because you're telling your body that you're being present with it, and you're doing the opposite of dissociating and checking out, like, it will move. It's just
Yeah.
like, if we dissociate or we check out or we're distracting, that's when it stays stuck.
Yeah, and that distraction is, grief brain is real. So if you're feeling like, God, I can't complete projects, or it's hard to focus, like all of that is a natural and normal response. And to the beautiful exercise that you just described, the other thing I would add to that is, going back to the hierarchy of needs and first creating safety in the body, is I had work with some clients, and we start with eyes open. So everything we're doing is eyes open, or like, soft gaze, because closing their eyes, like immediately, not immediately, but sometimes they can have, whether it's images or things come up. So, like, to your point, Summer, it's like, it isn't rocket science, and you truly are your best guide in this. It's like, once you have the foundation of, using what am I feeling? What's the emotion? Dialoguing with the body. I've dialogued with every single organ in my body, and they all have different voices and different needs. It's pretty phenomenal.
Mhm.
And it's like, I didn't get there overnight, but it just got there by starting to pay attention, like you're encouraging people to do. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
powerful.
it's so powerful. It's like, I want to say, like, I hear myself, it's like rocket science, and I think we need to be guided through it to learn it. I feel like, and that's why
Yes.
my motto is like, be your own medicine, because I really feel like, Well, as soon as you learn it, like whatever it is, like you can truly like be your own medicine. And it's like, I don't want to like diminish it by saying it's not rocket science, but it's like we often need guidance, whenever
Yeah.
so helpful to have just that witness, right? And just somebody to witness you going through it, and to witness you and to see you and hold you like in that space. It's pretty priceless, I feel like, whenever you're in
Hmm.
that space, like to be held. And so I love your advice of just like reach out for support, like get into
Yes.
community, like ask for help, like all of that stuff is really important, I feel like, too.
Mhm. Yeah, the shared experience.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if we can. I think there's just a couple more. Let's see. Oh no, I asked you that one. Heart chakra. Do you treat grief differently? I can really relate to this question. Do you treat grief differently when it doesn't have closure? So a sister sent that question in, and then I added to it. um, when the other person cuts off communication, and you're left to process everything on your own.
Yeah. I to my experience in like the ending of a relationship, it sounds like is the specific loss we're talking about. Again, we were talking a little bit about this where it's like other people don't give us closure. We give ourselves, closure. And the I don't treat it differently because it is about what is emotionally incomplete for you,
Mhm.
which is going to be different for the other person. You know what I mean? Like there's two people in the relationship, and um, each of us, going back to those recovery components, we have different things we need to forgive. We have different unmet hopes, dreams, and expectations. We have different things we wish were different, better, or more about the relationship. And this is where I think the attachment style and the inner child really comes in because, going back to that just core, those needs of being seen, of being heard, of being appreciated, of being acknowledged. If that is already a wound that we're bringing into the current relationship that is now ended, um, we can choose to see the person we are in the relationship with as a messenger, and this time choose to get the message so that we don't draw another messenger in to deliver the message. And we were talking about this before, and you mentioned this in our time together, which is um and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'd like for you to speak to this, but it's like there's this recognition of like, I'm complete here. Like I've done my own work. I've done my own excavating and examination. This is the message that I'm receiving, and I've got it. I don't need another messenger to
Yeah.
come along and deliver it.
Yeah, totally. I feel like there's a point was for sure for me, there's a point where it's like, oh, like I actually don't need to keep re-traumatizing myself here. And so it's like
Yeah.
for, for us to realize, like, I think because especially as women, we just want to show up, and we want to hold the space of healing, like often at like the cost of ourselves, like of abandoning ourselves. And
Yeah.
um, I think I did that for a long time, and kept blaming stuff on my own trauma. And so I feel like for everybody to be able to recognize, like, when there's like an expenditure outward of energy that's
Yeah.
not being met. And to like, I mean, it took me so long, like, to realize this, but it's like, and you almost I needed other people's reflections
Mhm.
too, to say, like, this isn't your trauma, Summer. Like, and like, and then even people starting to tell me, I actually feel protective of your energy. You actually need to stop giving your energy,
Yeah.
and so for
Yeah.
us to realize, like, how do you feel after coming out of like an engagement or communication with that person? Like, do you feel depleted? Do you feel re-traumatized? Is it helpful? It's like
Mhm.
to really start to track it. And whenever it's like 100+ times of like, oh, it's actually just re-traumatizing, like every single time, and
Yeah.
to really like give ourselves permission that, like, we don't have to keep putting ourselves through that for the sake of the other person's healing, that we could
Right.
actually choose something different.
Yeah, in that, the enmeshment in relationships it is a tricky thing, and it's sometimes very overt and sometimes very subtle. And, I think, offering some compassion to how heartbreaking it is when you see the other person. And this happened to me in, really, I'd say my like last major relationship, which was in my mid 20s, and we were together for like almost 7 years. And all of a sudden one day I moved to DC. He stayed in Tucson, and the idea was he was going to move to DC, and then he just kept building houses. I was like, you're not really making the steps towards somebody that's going to join their girlfriend in DC. And he's like, yeah, I guess I'm not. And I was like, are we breaking up? He's like, do you want to break up? And I was like, is this what's happening? Well, I guess this is what's happening. I was like, what the fuck is happening right now? And and that was it. You know what I mean? Like it was so confusing for me, and I had very little tools at that time. And I was deeply, deeply heartbroken because of that abandonment. And I realize now, having the tools that I do and in working with, men and women leaving relationships, is that, you know, yes, the ending of that relationship was confusing, but it was a much deeper wound in relationship to my father, of abandonment, of then that triggering, like, here's another example of not being worthy or not being lovable. And then seeing how we continue again, there's all these messengers delivering the message that, like, at some point deciding, like, oh my God, I am lovable. I'm going to surround myself with people that mirror that back to me. It's like, working through these belief systems, is, and what we made loss mean, is so powerful. In your story, Summer, just even the way that you're telling it right now, which is still very fresh, is so freaking powerful and potent.
Mm.
It is medicine. And I so appreciate you sharing that with me here today.
Thank you for that reflection, Liv. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ah, so good. That little shakeout. Let's do your thing to end it.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So we're going to do, this is, I call this the vitamin C breath. And it could also be, it's so good for the immune system, for the heart, and we're going to engage the arms and the hands. The breath is, you're going to stick out your tongue from basically the root of the tongue. So in the back, sticking the tongue out. And we're going to be here for a minute, and you're going to pant like a dog. And so as you pant like a dog, on the exhale, drawing the belly back towards the spine, and then on the inhale, belly comes out. So really stimulating and feeling that in the belly. You're going to feel the breath through the back of the throat. It may cause you to clear your throat. That's okay. Natural, normal for you. And then at the very end, I'll have you inhale the breath, and you'll bring the arms overhead, and you're going to hold the breath and just shake the body. And then we'll do that for a total of 3 times. All right. So we're going to shake it out. We've stirred some stuff up. Things are up to the surface, and then we're going to shake it out and create some space.
Okay.
Okay. And you can do this either eyes open or closed. I'm going to keep my eyes open because I want to see Summer panting like a dog with her tongue out. But this is a great one. Again, remember, any breath work that you do is going to be really powerful for moving through, grief and sadness, and how we breathe is how we grieve. So let's give ourselves some life here. All right. So sticking out the tongue, begin panting like a dog. Keep going. Last 20 seconds. See if you can pick up the pace just a little bit. Ooh, getting choked up. Take a deep breath in. Pause the breath. Bring the arms overhead and shake the upper body while holding the breath. Keep shaking. Exhale. Again, inhale. Pause the breath, hold and shake. Exhale. Last time, inhale. Pause the breath, hold, shake. Exhale. And I like to end with inhaling through the nose and then open mouth, exhale with an audible sigh. Let's do this together 3 times. Ah. 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 And then breathing in and out through the nose. Again, think, imagine, or feel each time on the inhale, creating even more capacity. And then on the exhale, drawing the belly back towards the spine, really letting go and exhaling completely. With your attention at the heart. Without putting any names or conditions on the heart, just allowing yourself to breathe here for a few breaths, imagining and visualizing the color green. So survival of the most nurtured as you breathe into the heart. I'm so grateful for this circle of women and community in this shared space to really speak into existence our grief and loss, giving ourselves permission to feel, permission to be exactly as we are. And then the acknowledgement of each other as we walk our own heroine's journey. Thank you, Summer, for opening up the space to share in this way.
I love that.
Whew.
That felt so good. It's like,
And that,
this felt so good. It's just so clearing, and it's just so quick and effective.
yeah, that was a minute.
Yeah, a minute.
Yeah, a minute.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm going to put a link to everything. To all, I mean, Yoga Doctors, my website has a bunch of Kundalini videos. I'm sure Libby, you have Kundalini videos. And I want to post the link to your Grieve Better course so that everybody knows where to find you. And I'll post all your social media links so you guys can follow Libby and reach out to her. She loves answering questions. She's just a beautiful, beautiful guide. I just, that's the word that's coming through. You're just a beautiful guide for people that are in suffering. And I just know that you've just been through it yourself. And it's just really beautiful to see you in this way, like offering, it's like turning your pain into alchemy, into gold, like for other people. So thank you just so much for your beautiful life. I love you so much, sister.
I love you too. Thank you.
Until next time. Thank you so much, Libby.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.